What's the thing that scares you the most?
Confined spaces and blood particles in the air, the dark, that coral thing that's been staring at me since I came in here.
Chris, I'm scared to death.
Welcome to the Sum of All Fear podcast, the show that examines real-life phobias and the horror movies that prey on them.
So pour yourself something strong, Feardos, and let's find out what makes you afraid.
All right. I've got Kinklin.
Non-traditional style.
But it's a Shirley Temple.
Oh, I love it.
It's a legitimate Shirley Temple in a bottle.
They're really good, too.
Yeah. I've been sober for 2 weeks now. More than 2 weeks.
I am so proud of you. You've put yourself in a lot of really stressful situations, too, that are just ripe for
I made it through. I made it through a pool party. I made it through a friend's birthday party. Made it a couple times at the bar. So
I'm really proud of you.
Just trying to giving the liver a little break.
Good job, baby.
It's a good thing.
Your liver
little detoxing.
I haven't seen you pressing on your liver in quite a while.
Yeah. It's amazing how that works. It's funny. After a bit of one of those life gets in the way breaks, I guess we're back. Feardos. We apologize for I think this is the longest break we've ever had.
Yeah.
It was probably needed. We just had a lot of stuff going on. There was just crazy life stuff going on, but, I'm Drew.
And I'm Chris.
I'm the husband and the horror nerd. And this is Chris, my wife, and she's the professional mental health therapist. She is a big fan of Dr. Drew's big brain, as well as his chiseled abs. And I like to plan my day around watching David Cronenberg movies in chronological order.
That's true.
So, that's a little bit about us.
Both true facts.
And I've also heard that we're now being called the Sid and Nancy of podcasting.
Now, that's the proudest compliment.
Yeah, I mean, so just a little tip for you, lay off the heroin and I might not have to stab you.
Okay.
So good deal.
Well, that might end poorly.
It did for Sid and Nancy.
I know.
That's for sure.
We can learn from their mistakes.
But please follow us on Facebook, guys. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Instagram if you're listening. We would love to talk to you. We would love to get more of a community going. We don't have a lot of chitter chatter. We would like to have some chit chat going about the podcast and about what you guys want to hear, what phobias you want us to cover, all that fun stuff.
What movies you want Drew to review.
Yeah, movies. And if you like the show, please go to your podcast apps. Give us a rating. Give us a review. Just like our good friend Wayne did back a little while ago. He wrote this on Apple Podcasts. This is an unbelievably creative podcast with playful and passionate hosts, Chris and Drew. Listen in as each week, this couple teaches you about fascinating phobias and discuss horror films that pertain to said topic. Kick back with a glass of your favorite whiskey or tea or Shirley Temple and prepare to learn something new each and every episode. Do yourself a favor and download this delicious ear candy now.
Ooh, delicious ear candy.
Wonderful review, Wayne. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
That we are so tasty to your earballs.
Tasty to the earballs. And about Wayne and Lacey, since we haven't been here in a few weeks, it seems like it was a long time ago, but we had that Sinister Creature Con down in Sacramento that we were supposed to go to, and last minute we weren't able to make it. But Wayne and Lacey, our good friends, went down, and on their way home, they called us and said, "Hey, can we swing by your house on the way back?" And we said, "Sure." And they brought us a signed poster. Signed poster from Joe Bob Briggs. It's the baddest ass poster ever. It's so cool. And it was signed to the Sum of All Fear podcast. So really sweet thing that they did. And we appreciate it, guys. We need to post a picture of that up on our social media too.
Yes, we do. And I'm very grateful that they stopped by that night because so then,
you want to finish that story?
So then we
went out in the back and had a few drinks.
Yeah. They also came back and we were talking about their experience at the horror con, and suddenly in the far part of our backyard, a fire broke loose.
Yeah. Just on the other side of our fence, there's like a ravine and like a little creek area. And all of a sudden we heard crackling sound, and we smelled a little smoke, and we're like, that doesn't seem right.
And I popped up and I said, oh my God, it's a fire. Drew called 911. The firemen were there within 2 minutes. Everybody said that I ran around like Chicken Little and the sky is falling.
But no, it was
So
great. But you know, she sprang. No, she
terrified.
sprang into action. It was great. And we immediately got the hose out, started spraying down the backyard. And I think some of you might remember we talked about this in our Fear of Fire episode.
Yes.
That in the back of our house a while back, like then this one was probably another extra couple hundred yards away from our house.
8 to 10 houses down.
Yeah, from the fire that we talked about in that episode. This one was directly behind our house.
Yeah, this was within 100 feet.
Oh, yeah, it was right freaking there.
We could see flames, and within 2 minutes, the fire department was there.
Yep.
Lacey and I had gone to our neighbors in different directions and knocked on doors, making sure that they knew what was going on and that they were aware. I hopped like a 5-foot fence, and if most of you are aware, I'm like 5'4". So I like hopped a 5-foot fence to get to my neighbor's yard instead of running all the way around, and knocked on her door. And when she answered the door, she was like panicked, like, oh, hey, it's you. And I was like, hi, I am so sorry to bother you. But there's a giant fire right outside our backyard. And she was like, oh my gosh, I was giving my baby a bath. I didn't even know. Thank you.
That was nuts. The first fireman on the scene was a guy I used to coach baseball with too, so knew him right away. And we
led the firemen through
they came through our yard. They came through our yard through the back fence and to fight the fire. And they were around for about 2 hours. They got it out very quickly, which was awesome. Thank you, first responders.
They were like, thank you so much for letting us use your yard. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me right now? You're saving everyone here. No, use it. Use whatever you want. Do whatever you need.
I think the term was you can have whatever you want.
Shut up.
And I think that was coupled with a little bit of tingling in your loins as the firefighters were running through the backyard.
That was adrenaline, I can tell you.
Sure.
Being a brain studier, that was adrenaline.
It was great.
So everything was they
were awesome though. They got it out so fast, and you know, first responders, man, those guys are awesome. Firefighters, they're amazing. It's amazing how quick they work.
They came at it from 3 different directions. They went across the ravine and up a little hill is an apartment complex, and they fought it from that direction. They stayed for like 3 hours afterwards, making sure there was nothing smoldering.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Gosh, God bless first responders.
Absolutely. Those guys were literally were pretty amazing. And we
that was literally my nightmare that we talked about in the fire episode.
Yeah, it was. And we had news crews in our backyard. I got interviewed on the news, on the local news.
Yeah.
We just let the news crews come through the backyard. The fire trucks were right in front of the house, and it was crazy. It was a crazy experience. So Wayne and Lacey, you know,
they helped save the neighborhood. So thanks, Wayne and Lacey.
Yeah, that was a much more interesting afternoon than they expected. Just having a couple of drinks and talk about the Sinister Creature Con. So
right.
It was a lot of excitement.
I had a little bit of acute stress reaction in the days following. And our children, even who weren't here, when we told them the story, they started reporting some acute stress about not wanting to leave the house because they wanted to make sure there wasn't a fire. So we all had to kind of process through that.
Yeah, it was close. And we live with that danger here all the time in Reno. So it was pretty nuts for sure. Our new friend Kaylee, the one who posted up on Castbox.
Yeah.
Not to move away from our fire story, but we gave her that shout out, and she responded on Castbox, I noticed. And she said, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting a shout out. She lives in Avery County, North Carolina, which is some freaking beautiful country. It's in the Cherokee National Forest, not too far from like Asheville, North Carolina, and Johnson City, Tennessee. And I've been up in that area a few times. It's an amazing place. So yeah, thanks again for listening, Kaylee. And we're so glad that you're still listening, and we appreciated your response. And that
Shout out to North Carolina.
We finally had a Beardo who actually gave us where she was from and told us, you know, a little bit about herself and all that. So we appreciate that, guys. We would love to see more of those kind of comments. We want to get to know anybody who's listening, and we know there's some of you out there. There's lots of people listening. So
getting to know.
We also, what else did we do? We did baseball like
All-star,
again. So our
surprise.
son, we
Hey.
thought summer was going to kick into high gear, and then I got laid off from my company. My company went under. So by the way, if you're, my company went out of business. And so if anyone's looking for a marketing guy or a content writer with like 15 years of experience, just let me know. I'm in the job hunt period of time, which is always fun. But then our oldest son got into, made his all-star team in baseball. Last minute. He was like the first alternate. So he got pulled up onto the team. And so we were back doing baseball every night for 2 weeks, 80 miles round trip.
Going down to
back and
Carson
forth.
City from Reno.
Yeah. So that sucked up a bunch of times. That was one of the reasons why we got kind of,
Well, that was two of the reasons.
yeah, two of the
The
reasons.
laying of off and then also the increasing of baseball.
Yeah. You would think being laid off, I would have more time, but but it also puts you into a deep, dark
But
depression.
it turns out you get sucked down into depression.
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 I've been doing it's been pretty much one day a week. I have
Can
one
you say depression like a Homestar Runner character?
depression. I was like, it's like the depression, man. I get like the total crazy depression. It's like the worst.
It's like I'm way down.
It's like I'm down and then I can't get up. But we did keep horror movie night going. So we were doing horror movie night every week on Sundays, and we've had a blast. We've had a really good time. We've met some really fun people. We've met some new friends, who've also been listening to the podcast, which is really cool. And we've watched some cool movies. We did Phantasm. We did The Omen. We just did They Live on this Sunday.
That was fun.
But we are not going to be doing it at Taste Chicago anymore. We're finding a new venue soon. Just because it just wasn't, I don't think it was quite the right place for it. And
Well, it's growing too, and we need a little bit more.
yeah. And we're definitely going to be trying to round up more, horror fans again to get together. Probably not this next coming week, but we'll keep you guys up to date on the social media and stuff. If you're here in Reno, we still want to get together and do this horror movie night thing. So it's been really fun. I've been really enjoying it. So stay tuned for that. We went and saw a couple movies. We went and saw Child's Play at the drive-in, which was fun. I had a good time.
It's not a remake, people. Stop.
I had a good time
saying that it's a remake. It's
definitely not a remake. Yeah.
It's a completely different story that is a parallel universe, basically. So just knock that shit off. It's so annoying.
Yeah, it's not a remake. Like they definitely used Child's Play as the catalyst to get asses in seats at the movie theater. But beyond that, it was a totally different script. No serial killer.
It's a different story entirely.
Totally different story entirely. And it was enjoyable. I liked it. I thought it was fun. It definitely wasn't a Child's Play movie. Yeah. It wasn't a Child's Play movie. Like other than it being a doll, a killer doll, it was all AI and all very, tech focused kind of what if the dolls become sentient.
It was very
thing.
Black Mirror.
Yeah, totally. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. And then we're going to see Midsummer tonight. As soon as we're done with our podcast here, we're going to go see.
What did you drag me into?
Oh, it's going to be so good. I'm so excited. It's opening night for it. Ari Aster's new movie. We loved Hereditary.
What?
I
Speak
can't.
For yourself.
You loved Hereditary.
I didn't love it.
It was so good.
It terrified me. So it did its job and never again.
There's been a lot of hype around this movie, and apparently it's supposed to be a genre defining, completely new thing that's never been done.
All I know is it's heavy AF.
We'll see. I didn't know that until you read the spoilers. So
I always read the spoilers because going into a movie like this, you don't know literally what the fuck you're watching. And I like to go in kind of knowing what I'm watching so that I can actually pick up on the story and be like, oh, it's because it was a weird ass dream and he was in separate dimensions.
Then watch the movie and you'll get that when you watch it.
It's not always communicated effectively.
But then you have to watch it a second time. Then the second time around, you get all those things, and it makes it so much more fun to watch it the second time.
No, see, I have more effectively utilized my time, which equals money, by reading the spoilers first, then going into it and actually watching it with that deep-seated knowledge.
I don't like it.
It's like watching Thug Notes, reviews of literature. Well,
that's like your new favorite thing. Huh?
I love Thug Notes. Check it out, people. Thug Notes all day long.
Is that on the YouTube?
It's on the YouTubes. It's on the Facebooks. Just go check him out, like him, watch everything, indulge. It's smart, it's witty, it's great. But he plays on these books, and some of them I've never read, and now some of them I want to read because I read and I kind of know the spoilers, and I want to see how the fuck that happens.
So it's literature based, right? Where he goes through and kind of gives synopsis.
Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream was one. what are some of the other ones? Fahrenheit.
Handmaid's Tale was the only one that I saw.
Fahrenheit 451, Handmaid's Tale. I mean, anything that you can think of, he's going to get after it. So get on Thug Notes while you still can.
All right. Well, that's our quick synopsis of our lives up to this point in time. What is it? July 2nd, 2019. Let's play a phobia-based trivia game. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I was born ready.
It's time for the world's greatest phobia-based trivia game.
What the fear? You say it now.
What the fear?
There you go. Okay, you have to say it like that.
All right, it's time.
Oh, man.
It's time for What the Fear.
I'm super rusty.
What the Fear.
I'm a little scared here. Biting nails.
I think you'll be all right.
Okay.
I think you'll survive.
You think so?
I mean,
Let's see.
There really is no points. It's like whose line is it anyway? There's not really anything that you're going to get.
That's true.
I mean,
Points don't really matter.
I might get you some sweet, sweet loving.
Ooh.
You know,
I could always.
little extra if you get them right.
Hey. You heard it here, folks.
All right. So let's dive in. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Your first fear, your first phobia is latrophobia. Latrophobia. Latro. Phobia.
And what's my hint?
Your hint is if you had this phobia, running into Bill Cosby, Neil Patrick Harris, or even Zach Braff might be enough to cause a phobic reaction. If you had this phobia, running into Bill Cosby, running into Bill Cosby might give you phobia anyway. Number of other phobias, but Bill Cosby, Neil Patrick Harris, or even Zach Braff might be enough to cause you a phobic reaction.
Oh.
You look puzzled.
Well, because I'm trying to figure out what those three have in common.
Why do you think I chose them?
I know. You're evil. Evil man. Fear of sitcom stars.
Ooh, very close. Very close. Take that a little bit further.
Okay. Does it have to do with a decade?
No. Nope, not the decade.
Okay.
No, but it does have to do with their sitcoms.
Oh my gosh.
It's right there for the taking.
Of doctors in
Yes,
sitcoms?
fear of doctors. Just fear of doctors.
Oh, damn. Wow, I was
just
way off.
Fear of doctors.
Damn.
No, not doctors in sitcoms, but just fear of doctors.
Okay, that's way off.
Yeah. So Bill Cosby, of course, Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable. Neil Patrick Harris was Doogie Howser, MD, and Zach Braff was Dr. Dorian.
Yes.
Shane Dorian.
John Dorian.
Wait, is that his name? Yeah. So, good job.
Dang it.
Well done.
I should have.
Not bad.
Why is the root latro?
Latrophobia. I don't know. I didn't look up the root.
Oh, okay. I was just interested.
That is interesting.
In what that means. So
we'll have to find that out.
Hot damn.
You ready for your second one?
Yeah.
Your second phobia of the day is venestrophobia. Venestrophobia. VENUSTRA. Phobia. Venestrophobia.
What's my hint?
Your hint is someone with this phobia would have a very difficult time being a Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue photographer.
So
someone with this phobia would have a very difficult time being, I might have a difficult time being a swimsuit issue photographer as well, but
for different reasons?
For other reasons.
How am I supposed to ascertain what reason?
Be a lot of tucking under the waistband, if you know what I mean.
Hey, yo.
You boys know what I mean.
Fear of women?
Close. That's actually part. That's part of it.
Fear of
specific kind of women.
Beautiful women.
Beautiful women. Fear of beautiful women.
You could have said.
If I had venestrophobia, I wouldn't even be able to sit here and do this podcast with you.
Oh, now you're pandering. Pander. Pitter pander.
I only speak the truth.
Pitter pander. Take a gander, y'all.
2 for 2.
2? No, I do not count the first one. The first one I said fear of sitcoms.
You got to doctors eventually.
I don't get multiples. No.
All right.
Not
Your
3 strikes, you're out. It's 1.
third and final what the fear phobia for today is melanophobia. Melanophobia. And no, I don't think this has anything to do with Trump's with the
Fear
first
of Melania?
with the first lady.
Fear of First Lady Melania. Who is a robot.
MELANO phobia. Melanophobia. Yeah, I think she might be a robot.
Yeah. I mean, we all saw Austin Powers. You know, the robots are always beautiful and illustrious.
Yeah. She's very robotic.
But it's not fear of robotic.
It is not. Would you like your hint?
Sure.
Melanophobia. These folks would definitely not have dressed like goths in high school. These folks would definitely not have dressed like goths in high school.
What do goths?
And there's nothing wrong with dressing like a goth not in high school either. That's perfectly acceptable.
But they would dress like goths now?
No, they would not. They would not ever dress like a goth. I just threw it in high school because we always remember our little goth cliques from high school.
Fear of the color black?
Damn it, you're good. Did you see these?
No. No, I'm pretty...
well done.
Thank you. No.
Nailed it.
Well, no, because I was thinking melanin, which is the stuff that gives your skin color.
That's right.
And then melanoma is the cancer. So that had to be a root of it. It had to do with... something involving being on the body.
What's switching from me being the host of What the Fear to from being the contestant,
the receiver.
I have learned that you are, not that I didn't already know this, that you're much smarter than I am.
I don't know if it's that. We'd have to do a little research on whether it's that or whether it's the quality of the hints or the obscurity of my references. I don't know. There's a lot of factors at play.
There are a lot of factors.
We can't statistically speak
I'm proud to say that you just nailed that though.
Thank you.
Done. Well done. You have now won multiple sexual favors.
Shit.
Which leads us
I couldn't even bring you back to my train of thought. I trained off on my train of thought on where I got to the fear of black. The color black. And so, yeah, that's how smart I am.
No, you did a great job.
I can't even train back on my own train of thought.
You put that together very, very well. Well, speaking of sexual favors.
Yes.
We are going to be diving into sex.
Let's talk about
sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. That's what we're going into.
Fear of sex.
Fear of sex. Do you want to give your quick disclaimer about trigger warnings? So we were talking about this, and we had somebody that messaged us a while back when we did the Fear of Men episode, because we dive into some heavy topics, and we dive into topics that definitely relate to people's abuse experiences and PTSD and all of that kind of stuff. And they said, oh man, the only thing I would say is, maybe during the Fear of Men episode, you maybe should have given a trigger warning. And Chris has a perspective on that from a clinical perspective, from the mental health side of things. Explain to me and to our audience what it is about trigger warnings that you don't necessarily agree with.
Well, it's not that I agree or disagree. It's that, clinically and personally speaking, I believe that that we don't run from our fears here. We make friends with our fears, and we make friends with our pain, and we bring dignity to it through the narrative and through experiencing the emotions that we experience by processing the trauma actively and being in our emotions in a safe place.
So you can't be, in other words, you can't hide from the things that are going to trigger you because they are everywhere. They're around you. They're constantly going to be there. So learning the better coping mechanism isn't trying to avoid those things. It's to just experience them and figure out ways to own those experiences.
So I wouldn't say the best. I would say studies have shown that trigger warnings just aren't effective in curbing that traumatic reaction. If you're going to have a traumatic reaction, it doesn't matter if I give you a warning about what I'm going to say or not. That trauma is deeply embedded, and so that's going to get activated regardless of how much we try to avoid that activation. And so it's my belief that here in a really safe place, talking about these things and listening to these things, that hopefully if you are experiencing a traumatic reaction, that you reach out to a professional or a trusted friend near you, and you really experience these emotions and bring a narrative to them, bring a story to them, because acknowledging the pain and experiencing the pain is the only way that we heal from that pain. And so I'm not going to give a trigger warning because
we just did give a trigger warning.
Well, yeah,
but
trigger warning about not trigger warning, but it's shown to not be effective. And so, what I will say is, this is a safe space to process it. If you need to process, if you want to reach out to us and let us know about your experience in listening to things that may be reactivating some trauma and how you used various coping skills to kind of manage through those emotions, that would be great. I will make a disclaimer: if you are currently experiencing sexual trauma, abuse, or trafficking of any kind, please immediately seek help. There are people that want to help you. There are people that can keep you safe regardless of how unsafe you feel now. And that is something I want to ensure to you, is that there are people out there that will help you get to a safe spot. Please reach out to those various institutions or to us, and I would be happy to guide you to the right places.
Yeah, and as always, this isn't a substitute, obviously, for any sort of mental. And if you've listened long enough, you know that that's the case. But we are, this is an entertainment podcast.
But this is a super deep subject, and this is a super incredibly intimate fear. And so it's really important that folks that may be experiencing that hear that it's okay to reach out for help.
Sounds good. Well, with that, we're going to talk about our phobia for today, which is genophobia, also known as coitophobia or erotophobia, the fear of sex. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Drew.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast?
Why, yes, I have.
When we were trying to get this podcast off the ground, we had a lot of questions. Like, how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps people like to listen to? How do we make money podcasting? The answer to every one of these questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. And best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now just by reading this ad.
Right now?
Right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now?
That means if you want to get a podcast going and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start. Join me and Chris and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. We can't wait to hear your podcast. Okay, so the fear of sex. It was interesting this week. As I was telling people over the last couple of weeks as we've been researching this one and telling people that we were going to be doing this episode, immediately, and I think people just don't think through it enough, but immediately people are like, how in the hell are people afraid of sex? Like, that's like a lot of people, that was their first reaction. They were like, man, that really sucks. And I'm sure it does suck, just like all phobias suck if people have them, but people didn't process it right away. Like
how that happened.
Why would they be afraid of sex? So genophobia is our phobia for today. Like I said, also known as coitophobia or erotophobia. It comes from the Greek word genos, which means offspring.
Ooh, okay. I didn't know that was it.
So, we're going to dive into this, but a lot of this phobia has roots in abuse. It has roots in maybe just really bad experiences, intimacy issues, rejection, shame, a lot of shame-based stuff that kind of kicks this into high gear. So why don't you give us the rundown on kind of the roots of genophobia and kind of where this comes from and how this plays out in people's lives?
Sure. So this is an intensely personal fear, like I said earlier. And it's that fear or anxiety about being emotionally close or sexually intimate with someone, right? The origin can be like you said, anything from a bad experience, a shame-based belief about yourself and your body or your self-worth, lots and lots and lots of trauma seen in Genophobics, very extensive and very secondarily traumatizing things that have occurred for folks to really get to the point where they are so against sex and anything involving sex that they just completely repel against it.
And this goes beyond just the physical act of intercourse. This can go to any sort of intimacy or any sort of
intimacy or
sexual interactions at all.
Absolutely. And what I will say is its roots in sexual abuse or in assault or in just any shame-based experience. It's the penetrating of boundaries, either physically or psychologically, that violate our trust, our inherent trust of other human beings that they're going to not violate this. And also, it violates our right to self-determination or in making a decision about this and how I feel about it and, having control. So all of those things combined really can leave us with an incredibly negative connotation regarding sex that is so deeply embedded inside of us that some folks never truly resolve all of it. The trauma is just so deep and expansive beyond psychologically, but also physically expansive. That's going to fall off when the wind blows. Sorry, he's trying to fix a curtain.
The wind was blowing over my microphone.
Sorry.
I got this. Don't worry.
So I do want to give some differential diagnosis. So if you...
Well, no, sorry not to interrupt, but to go back to kind of what you were saying, I was thinking about this, but there are people who, so this can lead to a complete rejection of sex, but it could also go the other way where people have just really unhealthy views of sex too. And they manifest it in kind of the opposite as well,
unhealthy
right?
or rigid views. Now that wouldn't necessarily
not
be
necessarily rigid, but I mean like more even people who are what's the word? Nymphomaniacs and things like that who go the other way.
Well, that's
right?
a philia. Well, we can always touch
yeah.
on the philiacs later because we've all heard of the philiacs. We know.
And philia is always, I guess in all these phobias, there's always a philia that's associated with
for
it.
every dark, there is a light, right? And so, for each one of these, there's its counterpart of equal but opposite intensity. And so, there's philiacs out there and we're all super aware of the philiacs, but we tend to really be very close-minded when it comes to someone who is fearful of sex. We don't.
Well, yeah, they're a prude. They're whatever. People get labeled.
And then we're talking the Me Too movement. People actually coming out and speaking out about it, and then people's reactions to speaking out about it, but then also folks who maybe came to that conclusion for different reasons, and it just kind of muddles up everything. And so everybody, the ultimate thing that everybody's trying to say is, please listen, I don't feel safe.
Right.
Please listen. Someone please listen. I don't feel safe. What do we do? And how that reaction comes about is varied. But at the root of it, that's what is going on here is people really want to be heard and to feel safe in their own skin and to feel like they have the right to self-determination. So whether it be verbal sexual assault or physical sexual assault or rape or secondary traumatization, knowing someone who was raped severely, all of that can lead to a very intense reaction negatively regarding sex, and the body's reaction positively to sex can cause a lot of what we call dissonance. The body doesn't match up with what the brain is telling me but the body won't shut off. So the brain must be wrong. And there's this kind of internal war between the mind and the body at the same time. So it's intensely complex.
And I'm sure there's also a group of people who, grew up being shamed about their looks, or being shamed about their body, or shamed about, maybe they're overweight, or they're, or maybe have a deformity, I'm sure there's so many
body
things.
Dysmorphia,
right? Or they don't see themselves properly,
right? And within this fear, there are kind of sub fears that have more to do with that specifically. If we can narrow it down to that specific,
they can all break.
There's a separate branch of this phobia that deals with fears of the vagina and fears of diseases involved with sex,
right?
So,
STDs,
things
STIs,
like that.
So they call them.
And then also too, we see another kind of tree branch from this, the fear of sexual dysfunction, not necessarily of the sexual act, but of something going wrong and you not being able to perform the sexual act to your adequate.
Sure, and men deal with that. I mean, obviously, especially with erectile dysfunction and with premature ejaculation or whatever it might be, like all those things. And the mental side of sex is, anybody who's had sex or hasn't had sex knows that it's definitely
so
a mental
mind
game
and so body. And if they're not connected, or if one is kind of moving diametrically in the opposite direction, then there's going to be some conflict, and there's going to be that dissonance. And that makes sex tense and not pleasurable when you have that dissonance between mind and body. So it's easy to understand how folks that do have
thank you Viagra
that do have ED or do have other sexual issues, like I was reading up on something called vaginismus, which is the involuntary clenching of the vagina, so much so that penetration is painful. And so sex becoming painful is kind of a different branch from the fear of sex. It does have a fear involving sex, but there's a pain involved with it.
Sure.
So let's explore more. That may be more of a medical diagnosis as opposed to a psychological or a phobic diagnosis.
But I could see how it would be. It would transfer over to the mental side as well. And I know there's also a deal where when men ejaculate, it's painful.
Right.
And there's all kinds of medical things I think that can go into that. And then there's just the emotional side, which is, people who are just being rejected or who have been alienated by people for so long, or have never been able to find a partner, or never been able to, maybe they have social problems and things like that as well.
Or they have that trauma that I spoke of. All of those things, there's one thing in common, and that is that excitement and fear feel very similar in the body. And when excitement or fear is mixed with shame, it can turn those negative on a hair, For instance, fear and arousal can be manipulated. Think about the BDSM world, right? A little bit of fear, a little bit of arousal. You know that you have control. It's kind of a self-determination thing. So there's some feelings of control in that. But the misattribution of arousal that's caused by trauma really is because of adrenaline. So what I'm trying to say is, when someone experiences sexual trauma at an early age and they experience arousal along with the excitement, or that is excitement. Excitement is arousal. When they experience the arousal along with the fear, that becomes indistinguishable to us. And it's hard to break that apart once it has kind of been melded in our minds. And this misattribution of arousal, where arousal does no longer mean excitement, it means fear, is deeply ingrained. And
it can be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people who maybe because they enjoy pain and then that arouses them, or something about shame or something about fear arouses them, that may in fact be a healthy way to cope with it, right? I mean, they have figured out a way to compartmentalize this into something, to channel it into something that has become
arousal.
Yeah, if they handle it properly. I'm sure there's ways that are dysfunctional, but certainly, and certainly not everybody that's into BDSM has been abused,
No.
or not everybody that's into whatever fetish or whatever it is.
But the same adrenaline is at play. It's that misattribution of arousal. I'm a little bit afraid, but I'm also really turned on. And so now it's really hot because there's that extra adrenaline in there. It's the same thing at play with a roller coaster. It's the adrenaline that tells us whether it's excitement or fear.
Right.
But we know cognitively with the higher areas of the cortex, we know that we're safe. So we attribute it to excitement. And so that becomes exciting instead of fearful. But the brain does not know the difference between excitement and fear until the frontal cortex assigns it.
You're afraid of your father growing up. Maybe he spanked you. Maybe he was just a strong personality. Maybe he didn't totally abuse you, but was very stern, whatever. You can turn that sometimes is turned into a fetish later on, or something that's sexually arousing later on because of the way that it caused fear when you were young, but causes excitement as you're older.
Well, it doesn't even necessarily cause fear or excitement. It's the same arousal, and it's how we attribute the arousal. So when we're older, we can do things that maybe move towards reattribution of the arousal from fear to excitement, through various means, like say BDSM. But what we do know for sure is that people tend to arrange their relationships and their sex lives in an attempt to avoid dealing with these kind of underlying fearful feelings at first, right? So think about, like you said, the gal who had been beaten, and she maybe doesn't process it yet, and maybe later she goes on to BDSM. But what happens in between? What do those relationships look like? What's kind of the pattern that she's trying to relive? Because our pain begs to be seen and acknowledged and known and felt. And that's very scary because pain is not a fun emotion to feel, and fear is not a fun emotion to feel. But if we can control it, if we can redirect it in such a way that we can control something that maybe didn't feel as powerful before, that can help us decrease that emotional response of fear and kind of reattribute it somewhere else. And so that's a big part of what therapy does in general, kind of working through those feelings. That's why it's important to kind of untie the knot of emotions that we get in with a therapist in a safe place, because that is a safe place to process those things and to say out loud things that you've maybe kept hidden for a very long time that are very shameful, and for someone to be able to hold them in such a way that is not degrading to you is very powerful.
So tell me about incels.
Okay. So, I mean,
she's laughing at you, incels.
I can't. No, I'm not.
I mean, you laughed.
No, I'm not. Oh my gosh. I have so much information on.
By the way, last podcast on the left did a great series on incels that I found very interesting, because I didn't even know anything about these guys.
I have so much information on paraphilias too. I forgot I had taken like 2 pages of notes on that. But first, let's talk about asexuality versus the fear of sex versus involuntary celibates, or incels.
Right.
So we're going to do a little.
Those are all related and yet distinct. Right?
We're going to do a differential diagnosis because these are often misattributed to each other. And I want everybody to be very clear about them. So asexuality is a sexual orientation. Just like any other sexual orientation, it exists in a range. Some people enjoy the act of sex, but have really no connection or no desire for sex. So they don't really think about it. They don't, they don't masturbate. It's
just not part of their life.
No, but when they have it, they're like, yeah, this is cool. Some people have a lack of attraction altogether and a lack of drive. It can be medically related. It can be intentional. It can be biological. It can be trauma related. I mean, it occurs in such a range, but it's an orientation towards how you perceive sex, and your personal sexual orientation is asexual in that sense. Now, the fear of sex is a response to, right? It's a response to the act of having sex. It's a biologically based response, but it, of course, exists.
Well, couldn't it happen with people who have not ever experienced it?
Yeah, it can, but and that's that secondary learned traumatization. as well. So you can, again, the fear of sex occurs on a range, just like sexuality occurs on a range. You can have the fear of sex where it's the fear of anything sexually related, just even discussing sex, all the way, to the opposite side of that spectrum. But it's really a reaction to, a response to the idea of sex that we're talking about there. So there may be desire, there may be attraction, they may have biological response, but that response is inherently anxiety provoking. And so that begs to be further explored and kind of uncovered and in a safe manner, of course. And so now we're going to move on to the involuntary celibates, or I'll call them the incels, right? These incels, this is a voluntary behavior, right? They call themselves involuntary celibates, but they've made a choice to call themselves incels. So this is a voluntary behavioral reaction to a lack of willing partners that want to engage in sex despite them desiring lots of sex.
And they blame everybody around them.
It's very narcissistic in its roots, very narcissistic, very entitled, misogynistic, has a huge root in resentment towards the opposite sex.
And men who are attractive, or men that get lots of women. So that's a lot of resentment against them as well.
They blame biology and biological determinism for their lack of willing partners.
Well, and culture.
Well, they play off of this 80-20 rule. And this is why I say this is a voluntary behavior versus a response to anxiety versus a sexual orientation.
Well, couldn't it be a response to, so in a way, isn't this kind of like choosing to be a really hardcore, dom sub relationship, or somebody who's got a very unhealthy view of a certain fetish or something like that? Couldn't it be that this is just their response, is to join this group because they feel like they belong, they feel like it's accepting of them as their in whatever state that they're in, as a result of their rejection or their shame or whatever? Well,
yeah, we all we all really want to be a part of a culture, right? And these specific members of this culture tend to be very narcissistic.
Yeah, they're assholes. They're total fucking douchebags.
You get a bunch of narcissists.
Let's not mince words here. These guys are a bunch of tools.
You get a bunch of narcissists together that feel very entitled to what they deserve. And so I wouldn't say it's a response to, I would say that it's a choice. They feel that this is their inherent right and that they are being somehow shafted. Sex joke with all of this. One of the proponents that they speak often of is the 80-20 rule, where 80% of women desire the top 20% of men only, which doesn't leave a very big choosing for these guys. These involuntary celibates, because like they say, it's involuntary. They really want to, but they can't. They're not allowed to by culture and their situation. No woman in their right mind wants to have sex with a narcissistic misogynist who feels entitled to sexual favors. So I feel like you dig in your own grave, you're making your own bed, now you're sleeping in it. But that's my personal feeling, not my clinical perspective. By yourself, you're sleeping in it by yourself, right? So that's nobody would touch your. That's kind of that versus, right? So we have three very distinct things. I can be asexual and not have a fear of sex. I can be asexual and not be an incel. I can be, I can have a really intense fear of sex and not be an incel because I'm still desiring sex and I still maybe have some sexual partners and I've tried, but I'm experiencing a lot of anxiety during it. A lot of folks who do have sexual trauma have that, and they work through things with therapy with their partners. That's PTSD, right? Somebody touches you. It's a traumatic reaction. There's all those traumatic reactions that you have to and that's again on that range of fear of sex. There's traumatic reactions, and the phobia is like the biggest, the most intense traumatic reaction that really impacts your life on a day-to-day basis in a negative manner. And so, I always recommend folks seek out that therapy, go get some assisted help with someone that knows what they're talking about, not a bad therapist. Those exist too. But Chris isn't one of them. She's a good therapist. That's subjective. But she's a good therapist. But back to the paraphilia. How much time do we have? So explain paraphilia. We've got about, 5-6 minutes left. Okay.
We've got about 8, but let's say 5 or 6.
So there's a big, huge book called Sex at Dawn. And Dr. Alex Kay was on Armchair Expert.
Well, can you define paraphilia for me?
A paraphilia is someone who's someone is where is it? Paraphilia is a strong desire or affiliation towards a specific thing sexually, right? So when we talk about, let's say, sex addiction versus paraphilia, sex addiction is a profound lack of compassion. There's a profound lack of compassion in that statement because it's not the behavior that's addicting, it's the neurochemical dump and the adaptation of the brain in the sex addict. And the nervous system drives that, repeats that behavior that produces that addictive behavior. Whereas a paraphiliac can be addicted to those behaviors. So you aren't necessarily a paraphiliac if you have sex addiction, but you can have a sex addiction if you're a paraphiliac.
I'm still confused.
I know, right?
So what's it? So give me an example. What's a paraphiliac look like? As opposed to a sex addict. So sex addict is somebody who goes out and just finds sex anywhere, anytime, any place, has a compulsion to go out and do it at all times.
Compulsion is obsessed with it. It interferes with their everyday lives.
Paraphiliac
is someone who found something sexually enjoyable.
So like a
furries.
Oh, a furry, or I was gonna say like the people who are obsessed with dressing up like a baby.
Yeah. Those are paraphiliacs, and those are things that people enjoy, right? So paraphiliac isn't necessarily a sex addict, but a sex addict can be
right.
Gotcha. Paraphilia.
Gotcha. So and paraphilia is just another way of saying fetish.
Right.
It's somebody who's fetishized something that turns them on in their sex life.
Right. And really, shame, again, is the bedrock of sex addiction. So we see shame as the bedrock of sex addiction and shame as the bedrock of sex fear. So I found that really interesting. Especially if you've grown up in a shaming or neglectful or physically abusive environment, it's kind of like a snowball of shame. You think you're wrong about your feelings of sexual arousal. So you kind of like dissociate from those feelings, and then it's hard to get those feelings back online, the mind and the body back online. So if you want to hear more about that Sex at Dawn book and Dr. Alex Kay, listen to the Armchair Expert episode. It's fantastic. I believe it was the Expert on Experts episode. And there's like 3 more pages of notes that I can't even get through because it's just so much.
Is there anything specific that you want to throw out there? Because we can always keep going.
Well, when it comes to sexual abuse, it increases the nervous system arousal. Then you add shame and fear and arousal, and shame actually kind of exists in the gut. It's in the enteric system. And so early in life, over time, the body and brain adapts to those feelings of shame, and actually the gut reaction to shame. So it's interesting biologically, the connections that they're making in the gut now. Addiction to fantasy is also a form of dissociation. So when we talk about fantasy world or being addicted to sex in terms of like other things.
It's like role playing.
Yeah, like role playing. There you go.
But it becoming something where it's literally every part of your life. So where you literally are playing out your particular sexual whatever impulse like 24 hours a day as you're in like this fantasy world of sex role play.
Right. And so there's
a lot of people that do that.
Yeah. And what they're finding is this kind of addiction to fantasy is actually a form of dissociation. And dissociation is kind of a natural feature of the human organism. Our brains naturally dissociate when something is incredibly stressful in order to better manage stress. So that frontal cortex kind of goes offline, and all of the reptilian brain kind of stays online, right? And it's a protective mechanism. But this dissociation is pathological when it becomes, I have to escape into this dissociation when there's no reason to escape into this dissociation. And so this addiction to fantasy, this addiction to that kind of paraphilic world, the brain adapts and then needs more of that and then goes offline more frequently. And so it really does take a long time and a lot of processing through therapy to bring back that homeostasis. So
if you had a fear of sex, if you were, we talked a little about philias, but let's end it with more about the phobia and the fear. You're going to avoid, it's going to be different for everybody, right? So some people are going to avoid physical contact altogether. Some people are going to avoid any sort of one-on-one with the opposite sex or with the same sex or whatever it might be. They might avoid it. Would they avoid seeing sex?
Yeah, it might make them deeply uncomfortable. They might avoid conversations about sex. They might avoid just anything involving sex.
And I've seen this with friends or people that I've known in the past who've had sexual abuse or trauma or whatever. You see that uncomfortableness. You see that kind of immediate kind of going within themselves or avoiding those topics or visibly getting uncomfortable or visibly getting kind of anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really interesting phobia in that it can take on so many different forms and it can take on so many different reactions. People long-term, people deal with it in so many different ways. And so there's so much we could dive into this topic, but I think you gave a really great, summary of kind of what this looks like and how it looks. And I think we'll try to lighten it up a little bit in our horror movies section, because it is a major topic in horror movies. We'll talk about the slashers and going back to, if you have sex, you're going to get killed, in horror movies. If you that's the rule, right? We'll dive into that a little bit. And it's something that, sexual overtones and things like that in horror movies have always been a big part, a big central theme that we see all the time. So, is there anything you want to kind of end on here before we finish up?
Just want to make note that really, when we talk about what is healthy and what is not, healthy is really about our own insight into what we're doing and our own awareness about our body and our mind's reactions to it. It's also about the return of choice and intentionality into our sexual lives. So I really just want to make that clear that is the definition of healthy that we're using here. It doesn't matter what that is because it's subjective.
Sure.
To you,
as long as it shows itself in healthy ways.
But those components, choice, intentionality, insight, and awareness, are really key in kind of reflecting on to ensure that what we're doing is really the healthiest choice for us.
Well, with that, thank you, Dr. Chris.
No, I'm not a doctor.
I know.
Shh.
You should be though.
Not a doctor.
Shh. And so with that, we're going to dive into our horror movies, and we are going to talk about some honorable mentions today. Woohoo!
Such a deep topic.
Deep stuff, man. Whew. There's a lot there. There's a lot to cover.
Heavy.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover there. And
how do we make this light without taking away the validity of their experience?
Well, I mean, talking about philias is always fun. But no, it is a lot. And there's a lot of, but you and I have the same sense of humor where every topic, there's no topic off the table when it comes to what you can make funny.
Right.
Like that's a coping mechanism. That's my coping mechanism. I make a joke about it. And that's why, comedians who make fun of the Holocaust or make a joke about, race or make a joke about, whatever, dead baby jokes were popular.
Man, I remember dead baby jokes.
To me, that's just the comedy is an area where there is no boundaries. There is no limits if it's done the right way. And horror movies are able to touch on things that have you ever noticed how animated stuff touches on things that regular shows can't do.
Well, right.
So like Rick and Morty or Family Guy or
Big Mouth
or
that was
Big
touching
Mouth
on the issues of sexual
puberty,
development.
And, there's no way they could do that.
No.
In an actual like live show. They did it on an animated show and it was fine.
So they do it in such a way that it actually feels controlled
right.
and safe.
It breaks it down. And I think horror movies do that for us. Horror movies provide us with a way to think about sex and death and loss and pain, fear, whatever it might be. They give us an outlet to look at that and go, well, shit, it ain't ever going to be that bad, or something along those lines. It's a coping mechanism. It's a way for us to, and that's why I love horror too, because it can touch on psychological things that are so deep. Or it can just be a freaking slasher where guys are prowling around and killing teenagers having sex.
Right. And we talked about how fear and excitement are
tied together.
Arousal of the same,
right. Right.
And so that's another way to kind of experience that arousal and reattribute it to excitement instead of fear.
I guarantee there are people who I know there are people who use horror as that outlet to deal with their trauma or to deal with their feelings, their things, their fears, their whatever it is. And I love that about the genre. I think it's awesome. So, with Fear of Sex, there was a ton of things I could have chosen for this week. And I went through Rosemary's Baby would have been a really good one. I think I'm going to save that for the fear of pregnancy, though.
Ooh. That
might be a good one.
That's me.
Yeah, I know. I actually almost did that one for What the Fear Today, too. We watched Knock Knock.
Which was so
it's a really
fun.
Really good movie, actually. I really like that movie.
I'm
pretty sure that's a Blumhouse. That's a Blumhouse.
Have you noticed the resurgence of Keanu?
Keanu's all of a sudden, like, everybody was bagging on him.
Everyone was like, Keanu sucks his acting. He's just like, duh.
Yeah, now all of a sudden he's like a god.
Keanu.
Yeah, it's really funny. But I've always liked Keanu Reeves. I thought he's always said he was great. And have you ever heard him interviewed? He's really an interesting dude.
Yeah.
But Knock Knock was great because it was like two freaking smoking hot young girls come to his door. His wife and kids had gone off on a trip and he was by himself and he was, he's like going to have this quiet weekend and he was smoking a little weed and kind of just chilling out. He was going to work on some project and these girls knock on the door. It's raining and they're soaking wet and they're all super sexy. And he's like super, super, super self-controlled. And like they come in and they start hitting on him right away. End up like just one little thing after another. Right. And finally they break down his barriers and he has sex with them both. And then they
cause complete madness.
Just completely. Yeah. It's kind of like that one with Ellen Page. I don't think you ever saw that one where she's underage and she traps the guy who she thinks is a pedophile.
No.
And tortures him. Well, that guy was an actual pedophile, whereas Keanu Reeves was just like a dad and these girls told him they were in their 20s and they were flight attendants and all this stuff.
Well, they were getting back.
And then it turned out they were like 16 years old. They were dealing with a dad issue. In a very ineffective
way. It does not help, obviously, if you have to do it, but wow.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
It was a bad idea. Not the best way to cope with your trauma.
Your trauma and working through your trauma, it is not likely to involve traumatizing someone else in the process.
Right? Yeah.
It's
exactly.
more of an internal process.
So it was a really good movie though. And the way that it plays out is it's just freaking, they basically end up torturing him and ruining his life.
See, this would not give me a fear of sex. It would give me a fear of strangers knocking at my door, which I already have, which is why I never answer my door. I don't care if it's raining. Bye-bye.
Fuck you. See you later.
Good luck.
Sad, isn't it? So that's a really good one. Teeth is another one that I have not seen.
I don't want to see. I don't like teeth.
It's the vagina.
Teeth are gross.
It's vagina teeth.
I know, but teeth are gross in general.
It's teeth in your vagina.
And see, there's that fear of the vagina.
That would
but
give
more
me a
specifically fear of the vagina teeth.
You don't like teeth.
No.
Yeah, you don't like teeth. So you would definitely not be touching that vagina. So that's that one I really wanted to get to that in the last couple of weeks to watch it because I've heard it's really good and it's freaking bonkers. But
honestly, talking about all of this and researching it and watching these movies is surprisingly draining emotionally.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, and especially
we didn't have the reserves.
Well, especially the ones we chose because we chose some that are a couple that are kind of heavier, definitely. And Species is another one on the sci-fi side.
I like that one.
That that where she's trying to get the alien chick that comes down, super smoking hot alien chick, needs to reproduce. So she's targeting these men and all this stuff. And that would have been a really good one as well. And of course, every single frickin' slasher, we know from Scream, right? From the movie Scream, we know the rules of slashers, right? And we know that sex equals death.
Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Sex equals death, okay?
And so now that we know the rules, right? So sex equals
You
death.
know the rules.
Then
You're all susceptible now.
So I decided I was going to put together to kind of lighten up the mood a bit. My top five favorite sex scene deaths.
Yeehaw.
And some of these are more traditional, like slashers, and some of them are not so traditional. But I just decided to put together my top 5. And so, real quick, before we get into our honorable mention, which we're just going to kind of breeze over pretty quickly before we get to our feature. But here's my top 5 sex scene deaths. Number 5, Friday the 13th, Part 2. We've got having sex. We all know having sex at Camp Crystal Lake is a death wish anyway.
No.
So we know that. But
No sex at camp.
In Part 2, Sandra and Jeff sneak off to a cabin where they start getting it on. And Jason will not abide by such behavior.
Well, they are adolescents.
And I don't know. I think they're counselors. So they're probably in their 20s, late teens, early 20s. And Jason is not gonna let them have that sweet loving. So he makes them into a sweet sex kebab for
Kebab.
2, with a spear right through both of them at the same time.
Fun.
So that is a great one. Number 5. Number 4, American Psycho. One of your favorite movies. We got Patrick riding the tricycle.
Yeah.
He's got prostitute prostitute Christy and his friend Elizabeth, and he's
no, that doesn't count. It's a prostitute he paid.
it doesn't matter.
Nope.
Still a tricycle.
Nope. Disqualified.
Oh, you're right. According to
Disqualified.
According to How I Met Your Mother, he would not get the belt for that tricycle.
Nope. That is not an organic tricycle.
But while he's going down on Elizabeth, he gets a little bitey down below, and then ends up stabbing her. And blood spills out over the sheets. But then Christy, the prostitute, takes off out of the apartment, heads down the stairs, only to have Patrick drop a perfectly timed chainsaw right down on top of her.
That was pretty rad.
That's my number 4. Number 3, your favorite movie, your not so favorite movie, Society.
Oh.
The shunting orgy, which we talked about Society on our Fear of
Society
episode. But the shunting orgy, Bill finds out why his family and friends are acting so weird. And we see this.
That's a paraphilia. Shunting is a paraphilia.
You think so? Because that's just how those aliens just do their thing, man.
Well, maybe.
I mean, might have been a paraphilia for the director or the writer.
Ugh.
But that had some great scenes in that orgy where people get hands shoved up their asses all the way to their mouths, and up their butt and pulled inside out. The one dude gets pulled all the way inside out, all of his guts. Good stuff in Society. One of my favorites. Number 2, Last House on the Left, Wes Craven. This did not involve actual penetration, but revenge-seeking mom takes one of her daughter's killers out by the pond out in the backyard and starts giving him the old heave ho, the
old one too.
Yeah, giving him head down by the pond. I was trying to think of some euphemism for sucking dick, but I couldn't think of it.
Heave ho works.
And then right as he's coming, I can't think of any euphemisms right now. She bites his dick off.
Aww.
That one was it was justice, which was great, but it was a very tough scene to watch.
I bet.
Very brutal.
Did your dick run up inside you?
A little bit. Yeah. That's not a pleasurable scene, but it is a good one. one of the ones that stuck out in my brain anyway. My number one top 5 sex death scenes is Hatchet 2 from the wonderful Adam Green. And let me just paint the picture here real quick.
Oh, man.
Dude's banging a girl doggy style in the woods.
Got it.
And then the last thing you hear is him getting his head chopped off by Victor Crowley. Roll the clip.
Ah, you like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Fuck.
Oh, yeah. Did you miss that?
I did. I really did.
Oh, how much? How much you
The
missed?
most. The most amount.
You like this better than ice cream?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah. Better than chocolate ice cream.
Yep. Fuck chocolate ice cream.
Oh, yeah. You like this better than Jesus?
That's not appropriate.
Oh, you like this better than baby Jesus?
About an equal amount.
Oh, yeah. You love me?
What?
Do you love me?
Yep.
Yeah. How much do you love me?
Yeah.
What? I can't hear you.
What?
Oh, tell me you love me.
I love you.
Oh, say it. Say you love me. Say it. Tell me you love me.
I love you. I love you. I love you.
Oh, yeah, you do.
Oh.
Oh, easy. Oh.
Ooh.
So good. So good.
So bad. No.
Oh.
You enjoyed this way too much. See, I'm glad your section is very light. My section is very much like just encouraging folks to process through their trauma. And
that is what makes our podcast great. A little bit of heavy, a little bit of light.
Oh,
You know, we got to have some balance.
that's true.
Got to have some balance. You know, nobody wants to just listen to a bunch of depressing shit.
That's true.
We
Very true.
gotta balance it with.
We gotta lighten this up.
You know,
with our top 5 sex scene
top 5 sex scene deaths.
death kills.
All right. So, but the honorable mention for today is one that is I think we've pretty much had to do, and that is It Follows from 2014. Little synopsis here. After carefree teenager Jay sleeps with her new boyfriend Hugh for the first time, she learns that she is the latest recipient of a fatal curse that has passed from victim to victim via sexual intercourse. Death, Jay learns, will creep inexorably toward her as either a friend or a stranger. Jay's friends don't believe her seemingly paranoid ravings until they too begin to see the phantom assassins and band together to help her flee or defend herself.
Dude, that slow walking death towards you is so fucking unbearably creepy.
It's pretty creepy.
Like, it's unbearably creepy. I do not like it. I was uncomfortable the whole time.
So I love this movie. I only saw it one time before this week or before this episode, and I really liked it when I first saw it. I liked it a little less the second time around. And I'm blaming the Horror Virgin because I had just listened to their episode on this movie.
You heard, Jen?
And they kind of bashed it pretty hard. And after watching it again, I saw some of the things that they were mentioning. Some of the just kind of, there was a lot of discontinuity and a lot of weird, just stuff that it could have been done so much better. Like the concept. And I think the reason why it ended up being a movie that everybody really liked is because it was such a unique concept, and they really did a great job with kind of just creating something different.
Well, they magnified a natural fear that exists with anybody who has sex, which is contracting an STD,
right? An STD, and this was. I mean, I think this whole movie is a metaphor for abuse, for sexual abuse. It's a metaphor for STDs. It's a metaphor for a lot of different types of sexual things that make people fearful of sex.
Oh.
And so I think in that way it really works. Because it does something very different with it, and it has a unique look on it.
It was interesting. I got kind of bored, but it was interesting.
What'd you think of it? Like, as far as, because I know you took a lot of notes while you were watching it.
I liked the concept. I thought, like you said, it was really unique. I thought, holy fuck, I would be so traumatized. And I don't know that I would ever personally have sex again after that happened, because I would not, knowing that's out there, I would not want that to happen again, even if it was like a 1 in an 8 million shot. So I imagine that's just like a little slice of what someone with this phobia would experience, except on a much more realistic scale.
Well, I had one of your favorite things in the very beginning too, which when they showed the first girl that ran out of her house dead on the beach.
Oh,
and her leg was all compounded, fractured over, like all twisted and weird.
I have a fear of compound fractures.
Yeah, that's like her
favorite. It makes my mouth sweaty, like I'm gonna throw up.
Chris's, we need to have like a little sound effect that's like Chris's compound fractures.
Making my mouth sweaty, don't.
Because Chris cannot stand compound fractures. She
the
fucking
worst. I
loses
can
it.
watch surgery shows. I can look at crime scenes and murder scenes. I can do a lot of really horrific things in terms of seeing them visually, but compound fractures will make me vomit and pass out.
She is not a fan.
I am deathly afraid of receiving one.
Oof.
Ugh.
Yeah. So so as this thing goes through, right? So this curse is kind of transferred, and they never really got into where this thing comes from, why. They never got into the kind of the meat of it. And that's why I always felt like it'd be really good to have a sequel that would almost kind of go to the root of it a little bit more.
Well, it kind of felt like what they were trying to say was that the trauma kind of follows you, that once you've acquired it, it follows you, and you can't pass it on to someone else. There is no passing it on. You have to, slow march right back towards it and kind of deal with it.
And once somebody contracts this thing, right? So you have sex with somebody, you pass it on to them, but if they die,
then it
goes back to you.
So
the way it ended was she passed it on to her best friend, the boy who had the hot spore the whole time, and she passed it on to him. He took it onto himself, and then you see him going into like an area with a bunch of prostitutes. Because think about, if you pass it to a prostitute, she's going to pass it to like 6 or 7 people
really quickly?
In that day, really quickly. So that was, kind of the way it ended was with this thing. But it's a great movie. It has some holes.
Yeah.
It has some kind of, some little things here and there.
Giddy up for sure.
But
it was not.
It's a perfect one for this topic.
It was not our feature presentation, because our feature presentation blew me the fuck away.
Yeah, it was great. And so It Follows was originally going to be our feature presentation. And I thought about it because it's a popular movie. But then after watching it, I was like, it just doesn't have the depth that our feature presentation does, which is Gerald's Game.
Oh, so much.
So let's check out Gerald's Game real quick, and let's dive into our feature presentation.
And now our feature presentation.
This is going to be good for us, Jess. Really good. That's a marriage, isn't it? Working on the difficult things.
For better or worse.
Let's go in, get comfy. I bet you think your husband will be back any minute. Try to go for him. There's no one for miles.
Gerald?
I'm sorry, baby. You don't get to know my name.
I don't like this. I'm serious. Stop.
I'm like that.
Stop it!
Are you playing?
Is this really what it takes these days?
God, how do we go so wrong? We were happy once, weren't we?
Gerald? What? What's happening?
Oh.
Gerald! Somebody! Help! Wake up. Just wake up. It's time to wake up, honey.
5 hours you've wasted screaming for neighbors that are half a mile away, if they're even here yet.
How long do you think someone lives without water? That will not work.
You can pull till your wrists break. You're not getting out of those cuffs.
You're not real. You're not real. Oh, baby, don't say a word.
Focus. You've been sleepwalking since you were 12 years old.
That's a beautiful dress.
He put you in those handcuffs way before Gerald did.
You all right, Mel?
You did everything you need to survive from the beginning. You just have to remember.
Back off! If you don't wake up, you're gonna die.
All right, our feature presentation, 2017's Gerald's Game.
So much
So
gooder
good.
than I thought.
Synopsis: when a harmless game between a married couple in a remote retreat suddenly becomes a harrowing fight for survival, wife Jessie must confront long-buried demons within her own mind and possibly lurking in the shadows of her seemingly empty house. This is based on the 1992 novel by Stephen King. We do a lot of Stephen King, I've noticed on this show. I've really
There
become,
is a lot of Stephen
I've always
King.
been a little Stephen King obsessed, but then there is just a lot of it out there. But it seems like they just fit these, and I think that's because he's such a good writer to our fears. Like he
So
does a
much.
great job writing to different fears too.
Yeah.
He has so much. His catalog is so vast.
And this one was just typing right to the fear of
huge.
sexual trauma
Huge,
and of
huge,
addressing
huge.
that sexual
And
trauma.
originally, this book was thought to be unfilmable because it all takes place
Holy crap,
in her
yeah.
mind. And so I think there was some people who had tried to kind of write screenplays for it in the past. There was a lot of like history there, and nobody was able to kind of adapt this. And so, but of course, my favorite director right now, I think, is Mike Flanagan. And
God,
Flanagan
brilliant.
took this thing on and just did a really good job with it.
It is brilliant how he pictured her kind of traversing the traumas in her life and kind of working through them both on her side and kind of from the husband's perspective. Oh gosh.
Yeah. And we'll dig into the meat here in a second, but so Flanagan directed this thing. He is, like I said, probably my favorite director right now with Hill House. We've talked about Hill House before. What a freaking phenomenal job he did with that. Oculus is another good one that he did. Hush, Before I Wake, Ouija. These were all great movies, really. And some of these were kind of his early work. And then Gerald's Game came right before Hill House, came out in 2017. And I didn't watch it for the longest time because I was like, I don't know if I'm even going to like this movie. It sounds, I was familiar with the book.
I thought it sounded terrifying.
Yeah. And you
get handcuffed to the bed and then your husband dies.
And then
fuck that noise. No.
Yeah. Chris won't even let me use real handcuffs anymore.
No, just in case. No.
Not even let me use real handcuffs.
And like fear of my partner dying and then being alone and then no.
Yeah.
Nope, motherfucking no.
And so we've got this beginning scene, right, where they're going to this retreat. Everything's going to be they're going to this like cabin, up in the
it's a
on
sex
a lake
retreat that's supposed to be
just
really
for the two of them. Yeah, the two of them are going to go and they're going to go kind of reignite some of their love life, and so
they're trying to use a sex as a conduit to repair their relationship, but that's not a thing.
That's not a good thing.
It's probably not a good thing. Yeah.
Well, especially with Gerald's rape fantasy. So
Gerald has a rape fantasy,
and it's not working
raped.
for Jessie.
And Jessie was raped.
Well, see, he didn't know that.
I know.
So he didn't know any of that. In fact, we learned that later that the husband's kind of a tool anyway. Like we know he's kind of a douchebag and
try to scream, try to call for help. Go ahead.
And Jessie's played by Carla Gugino. I think that's how you pronounce it. Who plays? She plays Olivia Crane in The Haunting of Hill House as well. Mike Flanagan loves to use those same actors over and over again, and we see later
she did a brilliant job.
Henry Thomas from E.T. The little kid from E.T. who was in Hill House as well as the father. He is the father. In her flashbacks in this movie as well. So Flanagan loves using these same guys over and over again. I found out something interesting about that actress too.
What?
Because I'd always kind of recognized her and I wasn't sure from where. She was in like every fucking sitcom in like the late 80s and early 90s. She was on Good Morning Miss Bliss, before Saved by the Bell. That was like the Saved by the Bell precursor. And she was on Alf She was on Wonder Years. She was on Doogie Howser. She was in like every, and she played like a similar character in a lot of those too, like kind of the cute little, high school girl. So I totally recognized her before. And I always was like, man, I know her from somewhere. And I never noticed any like movies that I knew her from. So we got Gerald, and he's got this rape fantasy. He hooks her up with the handcuffs.
He's got some Viagra.
She's clearly uncomfortable, right? He takes Viagra.
She's clearly uneasy. Yeah.
She's not.
She's trying.
She's not super comfortable with sex in general. You can tell.
Right.
She's especially not comfortable with this kind of dominance that
he wants to assert.
Gerald's trying to get her to be a part of, right? And he's on top of her, and he's giving her all this like
scream. Go ahead,
nobody can hear
help.
you.
Ooh, blah, blah, blah.
You don't even know you can't use my name. You don't know my name. Blah blah blah. Like trying to pretend like this is this big rape fantasy.
He's really trying to kind of engage in that role play fetishism.
And she is not into it.
She's not.
And there are plenty of women that are into it.
And it's not.
She is not one of them.
It is definitely not consensual, and so it gets real super uncomfortable real quick, despite them being husband and wife. And so I want to make that clear. You can be sexually assaulted by your partner despite your relationship.
So he's getting kind of pissed off, going like, what's the matter with you? Are you serious right now? Like, we were just playing.
He refuses to uncuff her, which is making her feel super unsafe still.
Right. And then he starts clutching his chest and has a heart attack. This is in the first 10 minutes.
Which is devastating to watch, because my father had a massive heart attack. And so just watching this guy die of a heart attack like caused so much anxiety in me.
And then he falls on top of her.
And he's just dead on top of her. And that is like claustrophobia. So this movie did so much for like my emotions.
So she had to push him off. She ends up pushing him off onto the floor. She's still in like this kind of shock for quite a while. As the sun's kind of going down, dog comes in, right? Doors open, dog comes in,
starts feasting on the body,
starts eating, pulling chunks of flesh off of his dead body, as we see this kind of time lapse of her kind of still calling out to him and like, maybe he's still alive and maybe he's
not really doing,
kind of in denial.
Yeah, kind of in denial. And that was something that he mentioned before he passed away, is, that you did what you always do. You ran. And he points to inside her head. So
this is when she starts seeing him.
Yeah.
So he starts coming to her as like a
dissociation.
Yes. Like in her mind, he's talking to her, and then herself
is also talking to her.
A stronger part of herself kind of is talking to her as well. And they're talking back and forth to her. And so she's processing all of this through her mind and trying to come to grips with like her situation and then her past. And
she's dissociated from the current situation, and her dissociations are kind of now guiding her. We talk about dissociative identity disorder. That's a very, very severe form of trauma, generally related to sexual trauma. It can be physical as well, but it's a protective mechanism that the brain uses. And we talked about that earlier. Dissociation becomes unhealthy when it's escape when there's no escape. And the husband said, you're always just gone. You're always in your mind.
Right. You always
not
run
here. You always run.
You always run away.
And so she literally cannot.
And she runs away in here. He points towards her. He points towards her head.
Yeah. And
says, you always run away in here. Like you close up. You get closed up in your mind. And that's what he tells her. As this delusional Gerald, we'll call him that.
Right. The delusional Gerald. Well, and the delusional Gerald, she is not only physically trapped, but now she is mentally trapped with her own thoughts, and she cannot escape her thoughts. She cannot sleep, which is something that kind of like the dream Gerald says, that you've been sleepwalking since you were 12 years old. And this other man put you in handcuffs long before Gerald did.
He put you in those handcuffs way before Gerald did. And we come to find out as she starts to relive, as she's dealing with the physical fact that she's attached to this bed, she can't get away.
She can't sleep, which is another thing she used to do. He said, if there's a monster under your bed, it won't bother you if you're asleep, right? And so she just always tries to run, whether it be in her mind or physically. That has been her coping skill with all of these intense negative emotions surrounding sex.
And so she's dealing with this physical thing. She's dealing with this fact that she's trapped and she has nowhere to go. And then her brain starts kind of going into these delusions. And then we start going back to things that she had blocked out, things that she had blocked out from her childhood.
That pain that begs to be noticed and begs to be heard and acknowledged.
She goes back to this eclipse from, her childhood. She's 12 years old. Mom and whoever go out on a boat. Her and dad stay back. Eventually dad kind of, gets her to come sit on his lap.
Masturbates.
Dad jerks off while she's sitting on his lap during the eclipse. And then that part of it is the physical part. And then he mentally abuses her through gaslighting her, convincing her that, that she can't tell mom because this is what's going to happen if you tell mom. And so this whole shame-based thing associated with this act that her dad did to her.
Physical and sexual abuse, took place, and it was really intense to watch. And you can see why that discomfort, that non-consensuality, that lack of power that a child feels during even a sexual encounter where she was not touched. How powerful of an impact that can
It was
have.
a sexual experience that was associated with this thing that was very shameful. And this thing with her father and this thing with her mother and this very, detached kind of relationship that caused divisions and cracks in her relationships.
And that gaslighting that occurred by the father, that further kind of breaks up her experience of the pain and doesn't let it be acknowledged. It doesn't feel safe to acknowledge it because it has to stay hidden away. It has to be locked down or else more pain will happen. And now she's trapped and she has to acknowledge her pain, and her trauma is begging to be heard and seen and acknowledged, but with an understanding, loving kindness. And that ends up happening towards the end when her stronger self comes to her in the visions as her younger self.
Right.
And
her
really,
younger self is telling her that she's strong enough to deal with this. She can get through this. And that's
that loving kindness, that experience of, let me process this and be with this child who was severely, shamefully injured and experienced this trauma, and let her know that she is safe now, and that she is no longer hurting, and that she is free of responsibility from this experience. And that is so powerful. I mean, there are therapeutic mechanisms called the third chair, or the third person activities, where we pretend
you pretend somebody is sitting in that chair.
And that was that, but in film. And I'm just going, what a beautiful depiction of
super
someone
powerful
having to sit through their trauma and how they processed it, and processing it with that loving kindness, because she really thought she was at the end of her life. She thought she was going to die there. And so that final end of life idea, as she's sitting there, she's like, no, this girl does not deserve to feel that shame. Let me make sure that she knows this is not something you need to feel ashamed of.
And then we have, so what do you think of this Moonlight Man that comes in? So that's kind of the horror, this whole thing is very horrific psychologically, but then we have this horror element of this super tall, gaunt, horrific looking man, this Moonlight Man that comes and just stands at the edge of her bed. Right. What is that to you? Is there a symbolic thing with him? Is there something, is it just something that Stephen King decided to shove in there to make it scarier?
There's just so much symbolism in this to unpack. And I think personally that Moonlight Man really is a representative of our traumas and the acknowledging of them and how scary they are.
But he was real.
I know, but them lurking in the shadows and et cetera, I think it's a larger metaphor for those traumas and how they beg to be seen and they beg to be acknowledged. and heard, and they keep souvenirs. I love that it kept souvenirs. I thought that
his
was
bag of trinkets.
I thought that was so
bag of
interesting.
bones, which is a throwback to another Stephen King book
because
too.
that too is symbolic of the things that our trauma keeps when we stuff it way down and we don't acknowledge it. Parts of us become lost in it. And so when she finally acknowledges her trauma, when she finally, releases her responsibility and her shameful feelings regarding it, and then feels more in control, she approaches that guy at the stands and then says,
at the end in the courtroom,
and says, the monster lurking in the shadows is always so much smaller than she remembers.
So he's symbolic of that monster, of that thing that's
that
of
we're
the mental
so
monsters of the
to unpack, that we're so afraid to acknowledge
because she had put everything, all of her trauma down instead of dealing with it. She had shoved it all down, and so this monster, this guy represents all of those traumatic things that we don't want to deal with. All of our monsters in the closet,
shadows,
all of
everything that we keep hidden,
right?
Because we are so terrified of what it might be like to acknowledge if they're really there. She closes her eyes like a million times and tries to pretend it's not there. Because once she acknowledges that it's there, then that means that it can have control over her. And when she was feeling incredibly powerless, that was not something that she could handle at that time.
And I know your favorite part is where she actually escapes from the bed, where she degloves herself, which honestly is probably one of the it's one of the most gruesome. Honestly, it's probably one of the most gruesome scenes I've seen in a horror movie. Because it is so realistic.
So
I think
bad.
they did. There's very little gore in this. There's very little kind of jump scares. There's very little scary.
Amazing.
But that part where she's degloving herself on the nightstand, pulling her hand through the handcuff and just taking off all of her skin is just a gruesome scene.
Well, I think that also too is symbolism. It's symbolism for the pain, the excruciating pain that it does take to deal with break yourself
all of the ways that she's
trauma.
Suffering through that experience. It's all
it's
got that symbolic
just so
kind
much symbol. Like, it was just ripe with symbolism.
Yeah,
I loved it. Such a good movie.
It really is a great movie.
Good. I can't wait for you to read it.
Yeah, the second time around watching it, I liked it even more. I think it was so well done, and I did read it. I read it when I was younger, and I remember thinking when they were making the movie, I was like, "There's no way." There's no way this is going to be.
It's perfect.
This is going to be good, and that's where I think Flanagan has just done a really, really great job of making things his own, but so true to the work that he's trying to adapt.
So true.
Fun fact: Moonlight Man is Lurch from Addams Family.
Ha!
Yeah. Carl Strukanian.
I think it's interesting that killer, just chose to watch over and not take any action.
Right.
I think that's symbolic too. Like I said, I could unpack this movie for hours.
There's so many things.
Deep.
And what's fun about this movie too is there's so many little things that he puts in these movies that are references to other Stephen King.
What's the dog about? Why is the dog eating everything? What's up with that?
Yeah, but he's referencing a lot of other Stephen King stuff.
Right.
Like at one point they called the dog Cujo.
Right.
And there's references to the Dark Tower. Dolores Claiborne actually is a parallel to this book because Dolores Claiborne takes place during that eclipse. So the book Dolores Claiborne, and there's a scene where she says she describes a dream where a woman's standing over a well. That's from Dolores Claiborne. And lots of stuff like that. Bag of Bones. They talk about his Bag of Bones. That's from that's a reference to Bag of Bones. There's a lot of other kind of Stephen King little things that pop up through there. The book that's thrown. I thought this was kind of fun. In his Flanagan directed a movie called Hush that starred his wife Katie Siegel as a deaf woman who. She was an author, lived by herself, and then it's a home invasion movie where people come in or break in and try to kill her or whatever. And she's during that that movie in the beginning, she's writing her book and it's called Midnight Mass. And that's the book that she throws at the dog in the movie.
I love that.
Which I thought was kind of cool. I love those little fun facts. But excellent movie. Excellent. I definitely think it was the best choice for this.
I had the wrong idea about it. Definitely check it out.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and for really what I think, especially with us dealing with the psychological side of things and with the therapeutic side of things, this movie really brings to light kind of those deep, dark issues that tend to lead to sexual dysfunction, fear of sex, those phobias, those things, and shows a strong character, a strong female character overcoming those things in front of your eyes throughout the whole movie.
A character's process of overcoming too,
which is super badass. And I mean, it's so cool,
and it not at all cheesy, which it could easily have become cheesy.
Yeah,
like that. Oh, she overcame, and instead it was just like, fuck,
just real, just like very
real in her experience.
Yeah, man, I really, really, really appreciate that movie, and I think for like I said, for our podcast and for what it is that we're trying to kind of do with this was movies that really represent what these phobias are about. And sometimes we nail it, sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's a
bit of a stretch.
It's a bit of a stretch, but this one really does get to the heart of it and has a lot of kind of therapeutic value.
It does.
This would be a movie that you might even show clips to illustrate points about dealing with, trauma and things like that.
When I do cinema therapy, I would definitely show, a movie like this and talk about her experience of processing her trauma and her experience of why she might use dissociation as a coping tool. Why might she do that? Why does it feel like she married into the only relationship pattern that she knew? What does that look like when we take back control and intentionality in our relationship decision making? Things like that. There's a lot of conversation that can be had that is therapeutic surrounding the themes in this movie, for sure.
Well, go watch Gerald's Game. It's on Netflix right now. It was a Netflix original, actually.
Yeah, really well done.
Freaking great movie. And like I said, guys, sorry it took us so long to get an episode out to you. I'm going to try to commit to getting back on the horse here and getting stuff going. We've got more free time now. Baseball's over. We should be able to crank some episodes out here.
Let's do it.
A little more. We only did one episode in the month of June.
I know.
That's crazy. But yeah, guys, we appreciate you guys listening. Again, please give us a rating and review on your podcast apps, and send us some messages on social media. We will be back next time. I don't know what we're going to do. I was thinking we need to do Fear of Sharks.
That might be fun.
Let's make that decision right now.
Fear of Sharks.
Because I want to fucking watch Jaws.
Let's do it.
It's one of my favorite all-time movies. And
Let's watch them all.
I think I only watched it like 2 weeks ago, but I want to watch it again. I love it. And it's summertime. And my hometown is riddled with sharks right now.
And we need a little bit of a pick-me-up because this one was really heavy.
Yeah. Let's go do some dancing with bow-legged women. What's he say?
Shark Week.
Go do some don't go swimming with bow-legged women. That's what it is.
Shark Week is my favorite roller derby player's name, by the way.
Ooh, I like it. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. And we're going to go see Midsummer right now. Yay.
Yay.
Until next time.
Stay afraid. Stay very afraid.